Hi, I'm Larry Lidner, the president of Hingham Cemetery, and you're watching Getting to Know on HCAM TV.
On this episode of Getting to Know, we'll visit the Hingham Cemetery and celebrate the reopening of the newly renovated Ames Chapel, take a tour of the cemetery grounds with tour guide Cinda Day, and meet with some of the people that helped take care of this special park. All this and more coming up on Getting to Know.
In this episode of Getting to Know, we're going to take you on a tour of the beautiful 13-acre Hingham Cemetery. It is a sacred space, it's a graveyard, but it's also an open-air park. We have the only arboretum on Boston's South Shore. It's a museum with very significant sculptures, and it's also a history museum with the graves of some very famous Americans, and we're going to be showing you all of the very important and beautiful sites in the cemetery today. I've been on the board for 8 years now, 8.5 years, and I've been serving as president since 2010. When I first came on, I thought I would put my skills as a writer to use. I was the guy who wrote articles about the cemetery for different newspapers and magazines, and I would put out press releases when we had an event. But what I came to realize as we went forward is really this is a kind of urban planning experience, and I became a sort of small-scale urban planner in this volunteer position because what we're very actively doing is making this a place that people want to come to and enjoy. In present-day Hingham, we have Tai Chi classes here. People walk their dogs here. They push their baby carriages. They come here just to contemplate, to chat. With the opening of the Ames Chapel, we're going to have all kinds of events there. So it was a matter of expanding my skill set, going from being a writer to somebody who is putting a place on a map in a new and contemporary way, and I've really enjoyed that aspect of it. We've partnered with a number of Hingham organizations, especially recently with the restoration of the Ames Chapel. So we were very lucky to get some significant funding from the Community Preservation Committee in Hingham, CPC. So that's a way of partnering with them to help reimagine and re-envision a space. We also partnered with the Hingham Historical Commission. We were able to get some donations from their Greenbush Fund to help restore the chapel. And now that it's coming to fruition, I just in fact have been talking to the president of Hingham's Downtown Business Association, Liz Klein, and I'm going to be meeting with her to discuss ways in which the downtown business community can use the chapel to further its own interest and draw people to the square. What people don't realize is the cemetery is right here, and it's quiet and it's beautiful, but it's just steps from the center of Hingham Square, and we want people to be aware that it's a piece of downtown community that they can go to. The Ames Chapel is such an interesting project. It was built in 1886, and funds for the project were gotten very much back in the 1800s, the way they were gotten today. The board of directors of Hingham Cemetery went to the townspeople and said, let's raise funds to build this chapel. And it was very important at that time because some Hingham families were moving westward, but they wanted to be buried at home. But once they had moved westward to other states, they weren't affiliated with the house of worship in Hingham anymore. So when they came back to be buried, they needed a space to have a funeral service. And the chapel was going to fulfill that need. So by hook and by crook, the money was raised and the chapel was built in 1886. But then 40 years went by, and we're in the 1920s, and we have the children and the grandchildren of the families who had moved west. And for them, Hingham wasn't home anymore. Home was wherever they were born and grew up. And the chapel fell into disrepair. And for 90 years pretty much, it just sort of got worse and worse, cobwebbier and cobwebbier, and it became a home for squirrels and birds, and there were leaks in the roof, and the basement became a graveyard of its own for rusty old lawnmowers. But finally, in about 2011, the board said, yeah, let's really explore this. Let's talk to architects. Let's see how we can do some fundraising, some serious fundraising, just for the chapel. And let's not make it a funeral parlor anymore, although people are certainly welcome to have a funeral service in there if they want. Let's make it a center for community life. Let's open it up to the town and say, you can use it for conferences, symposiums, small chamber music concerts, book readings, art gallery showings, rehearsal dinners, christenings, small weddings, you name it. And because again, we want the cemetery to be in contemporary use as a place for all kinds of activity. And here we are, and it's about to be open, and we're excited about it, and more importantly, the town is excited about it.
Placemaking is a term contemporary urban planners use to talk about taking a place and turning it into a different place, a better place, re-envisioning it for new purposes to serve and engage the community. You are engaging in placemaking. You are making it happen. Thank you for your efforts. You're doing a great job. Welcome to the new place that you made, your new home in our community.
The Ames Chapel was built in 1886, and it is an example of American Queen Anne style architecture with the irregular and asymmetrical facade and the front-facing gables and the beautiful detail in the woodwork of the exterior. We think the paint color was the original color, or close to the original colors of the chapel when it was first built. It was built by a man named Preston Adams Ames, and it was built in memory of his wife, Annie Fessenden Barnes Ames. They lived in Boston, but summered in Hingham, and she was the daughter of a very wealthy merchant in Hingham. We are very excited about the completion of the restoration of the Ames Chapel. It had been in terrible disrepair for decades. Really nothing had been done since the 1930s. There was no water and there was no heat. And it was our current president, Larry Lidner, who led the charge and came up with a vision for the building and a plan to raise the funds to restore it. The transformation has been remarkable. The lower level of the chapel was really a cellar with just old stone foundation, and it's been transformed into this beautiful space that functions as a caterer's kitchenette, and we'll have office space there, and we'll be storing some of our archives, all of our archives actually, and our records. So it really turned out to be a beautiful space. I think the focal point in the chapel and in the Great Hall is the beautiful stained glass window at one end of the room. And it was wonderful to bring that out of storage and put it back where it belonged. It just looks gorgeous when the light is on it. There's an inscription in it for a dedication to Annie Ames. And people are also very intrigued with the transom lights above the windows and the irregularity of the colors. And again, that is very typical of the Queen Anne style of architecture in which this chapel was built. Ann Kimball and I have been on the decorating committee of the chapel, and we scoured the South Shore to find the furnishings that you see in it and had them refurbished and reupholstered. We're really happy with the colors and the style, and we feel as if the parlor in particular looks as if it has always been here. Ben Wilcox and his crew worked for months to restore all of the original woodwork in this building, and I think it's just spectacular. the original beadboard, the beautiful doors, they are all gum wood. The floors are original and they are southern white pine. The staircase, I think, is just one of the most beautiful things about the chapel. And then leading down to the first floor, there was a real effort to make the first floor connected with the floor above, and so all of that woodwork is reproduction. The baseboards, the panels, the beautiful windows were all made to look as if they were there when the first floor existed.
I wrote a grant several years ago to the Mass Historical Commission, and we were awarded a $50,000 grant for the restoration of the Ames Chapel. They liked the project so much that they had a little bit of extra money, since some projects they had approved didn't go through, that they awarded us an additional $15,000. So we got $65,000 from the Mass Historical Commission. We did some private fundraising. I got involved in that, and we were successful. We held a fundraiser reception at a local residence. That was successful in launching the private donation part of the campaign. And we also received support from Hingham Historical Society and obviously from CPC, Community Preservation Committee in Hingham. And we were able to fund over 50% of the restoration through the fundraising. And I was just surprised at how willing people were to join in and help us out. They believed in the project. They wanted this historic building to be preserved. They saw the potential as we did. It's a wonderful example of Queen Anne style architecture. And Hingham enjoys a great deal of antique homes and architecture, but not very much Queen Anne. I think people in the town recognize that, and they were willing to join in our efforts to preserve the Queen Anne style.
Even though we're a 400-year-old cemetery with the graves of some very significant Americans through all of those centuries, we're still an active cemetery, and it's possible to buy a lot here and be buried next to people like Paul Revere's daughter and governors of Massachusetts and so on.
When Sue and I are showing burial sites, we really are on a mission to make the people feel comfortable. This is our aim. Knowing that they're either going through, tremendous emotions, we tend to try to point out the areas that we're showing them, and also the comfort and serenity that is the cemetery. And that seems to really work for a lot of people. It kind of makes them a little calmer, and it helps with their emotional distress that they might be in. People that are interested in getting a burial plot, either for an immediate burial or in the future, will be given one of these folders. And it gives all the information about our cemetery, a mission statement, etc. It has a map that shows the different areas of the cemetery. There's also a price list in here for people. And it also has the veterans area, which is defined, a memorial garden, which is defined, and our Water Street area, which is defined. It's known to be very helpful. It answers a lot of questions. Sue and I try to answer all of them for them at the time, but I know when they leave, they forget things, etc., and this is tend to be very helpful. In showing burial sites, sometimes it's always nice to point out that if you stand in certain areas, you can see the harbor in the distance. You can look over your shoulder and see the old bell tower. You can see Old Ship Church. You can see part of Old Derby, and you can look down the hill and see our Ames Chapel. So that being said, not partnering with it, but historically, it adds to the historic part of our cemetery. There is a perception that there are no cemetery plots available in the area. People are running out of plots, the cemeteries, And I would just like to tell people that we have not had that problem. When we get a call from a local funeral home, or even one in the area, or a call from a particular family, we can always make a plan to find a spot which they would be happy with in the cemetery.
We are in the early stages of trying to get the cemetery, and I think we'll be successful, on the National Register of Historic Places, and that'll be a great coup for us.
There are 6 cemeteries in town. All of them are private, but Hingham Cemetery is the oldest, starting in 1672, and it's the largest with 13 acres. All right, I want to take you back 5,000 years ago, long before Plymouth Plantation, long before the first settlers came. Way back between 3000 and 1000 BC, there were nomadic people wandering the hills in Hingham, and they were wandering around here. It was probably all wooded. And during that time, one of these people dropped what is known as an effigy. It was a small stone sculpture about 5.5 inches long, and it was in the shape of a harbor porpoise. Now, these people were hunters and gatherers. They followed the seasons, and the harbor porpoise was probably a very important food source to them. It not only was food, but it was for utensils and oil. So the harbor porpoise was important. It is considered one of the finest late Archaic period artifacts that has been found. And that was somewhere up here in the Hingham Cemetery. I'd like to fast forward now from the late Archaic period to the time of the early settlers. 1638 was the time when Hingham was founded. It was customary at the time for the early settlers to bury their dead around the meeting house. Now, the first meeting house was not the old ship church, but it was approximately where Old Derby stands today. That building stood for about 40 years until it became too small, and they tore it down, taking the boards and the timbers. They brought them over to this site, and they built the old ship church. That was 1683. By the 1800s, Hingham had turned from a rural community into an industrial community. There were factories all up and down Main Street. There was a big factory where St. Paul's School is today. And they needed better transportation for the many people that had come to Hingham and had grown the populace. So they decided to have a horse-drawn trolley go from downtown Hingham up to Center Hingham and eventually up to Queen Anne's Corner. The problem was there were 2 major hills, one in front of Old Derby and then another one in front of Old Ship Church, and then the big long one going up Pear Tree Hill to Center Hingham. The horses couldn't make all 3 hills. So they decided to lower the street by hand to make it an easy passage for the horses. What happened when they dug out the street was they found the early settlers who had been buried around the meeting house. Remember, that was Old Derby. They found burials over there. They found burials on Main Street in front of Old Ship Church. The people they could identify, they reburied. The people that they couldn't identify were buried in a sarcophagus right here in this mound, and on top of that they put the settlers' monument. The importance of unearthing these early settlers was really very strong, and the town decided that for their town seal they would use the 2 most important revered symbols of the town. One was the Old Ship Church and one was the settlers' monument. And if you look at the town seal, you will see both of those entities on the town seal. Now, you're going to ask, why does this area look like an inverted donut? And that is, and the reason they chose this site is because this is the site of a fort that was built in 1676 during King Philip's War. We think the fort was really a stockade. It wasn't a fort with weapons and all the rest of it, but it was merely a holding place in case you needed to be safe. Remember what it was like in those days in the 1600s. If you survived childbirth, if you survived plague, if you had enough food, if you survived the winter, you were very thankful. And people went to church all the time to thank God for the blessings that they had. The individual was not important. It was just the fact that they had revered God and they survived, and that is what went to heaven. So there was no personal expression at all on these faces. That will change as life got easier and times became better for the early settlers and their descendants. All right, there's one other kind of headstone that I should comment on, and those are the zinc monuments. There aren't too many of these in the New England area because there was plenty of granite and also marble. They're more popular out west. But these zinc monuments are made into 3 pieces and are hollow. There's a back, there's a front, and then there's the memorial piece in the very front here. Now, they hold up very well. Unfortunately, the really tall monuments, many of which are Civil War soldiers, are starting to deteriorate and list because the metal is starting to give out. But these smaller ones are doing fine. The interesting thing, it has been rumored that during Prohibition, people discovered this was a great place to hide liquor. Of course, that didn't happen in Hingham. When the street was dug up to put the trolley down the middle of Main Street, they found the 3 ministers of the old ship church had been buried in the front of the church. They couldn't identify exactly who was who, so they decided to put the 3 ministers into one tomb. And we have Reverend Hobart, Reverend Norton, and Reverend Gay. And they're in one tomb because we couldn't identify who they were. All right, this is a good example of how the death head's mask had changed. This man, Samuel Lincoln, is shown here buried with his 2 wives. And instead of just the teeth and the eyes, we have a picture of him with his wig and with his ruffled collar, and the 2 wives have little bonnets on. He has very upswept eyebrows, he has eyes and a nose. It shows a personification of the person who's buried here. This also is an indication of his status. And I have to tell you that when you go through a cemetery, even today, look at the headstones and think about what people wanted to say about the deceased and about their family. Now, Samuel Lincoln wanted to show that he was an aristocrat, he had his wig and his fine clothes, and he wanted to show that his wives were an important part of his family. Many times the wives were considered chattel. They had very few rights, if any at all. But to put them on a headstone meant he was above that, he was an aristocrat. Here we have our most important Hingham hero, Benjamin Lincoln. Benjamin Lincoln lived right across from the Lincoln statue, the big gray house that has the beautiful blue flowers in the spring. That was his original house, and a descendant of his family has lived there ever since. General Cornwallis was having, actually England was having a lot of problems trying to defend their own country. Their enemies knew that they were overextended by having all these troops in America, and the king said, "You better get home." So Cornwallis said to George Washington, "All right, that's it, we're leaving. But I don't have time to make a formal surrender. I'm going to send my second in command." And George Washington said, "Funny thing, I don't have time for a formal surrender either. I will send my second in command, and that is our friend Benjamin Lincoln." In 1835, a Hingham benefactor by the name of Adam Thaxter walked up behind the old ship church, and he came into the old burial ground, which was this area right here. And what he found was greatly distressing. He found the headstones were turned over, there were children jumping over the headstones, dogs running around, maybe cattle, shrouds, coffins. It was a disgrace. And he said, "I want to buy this property and turn it into a really beautiful cemetery." So he bought the property, created Hingham Cemetery, which was incorporated in 1838. And over the years, over the next few years, there were other sections added until today we have 13 acres.
I think the cemetery is unique because, first of all, most cemeteries just don't look like this. A lot of them are very flat, and the graves are all in rows, 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 and they just feel very formal and even a little forbidding in certain ways. And this is such an inviting space, so I think that makes it different. I think the age of the cemetery makes it different. I think anything started in the 1600s in the United States makes something very different. And I think that the fact that this beautiful cemetery is in this beautiful town and is right by the business epicenter of the town in Hingham Square makes it a wonderful counterpart to all that activity that goes on in the square. People can come up here and contemplate and just have a respite, or maybe get their ice cream cone from Nona's and take a walk up here and have a nice quiet few moments to themselves. I think all those things make it really special. The Buildings and Grounds Committee does exactly what you think it would do. It makes sure that the cemetery stays as beautiful as it always is. If a tree needs to be pruned, they'll do that. If a stump needs to be sawed down, they'll take care of that. Or they'll make sure about mulchings and plantings and things like that. We had to get a shed to store some supplies to take care of the grounds, and they chose the shed and got that up. So they're very hands-on. It's a very tactical job, just making sure that what you see is just wonderful.
We are the Building and Grounds Committee presently, and we're responsible for the maintenance of the grounds, the trees, the monuments, the headstones, the grounds. And it's a big job, but mostly it's planting, trimming, pruning, cutting down, replanting to maintain the beauty of the grounds. I've been on the board for 3.5, 4 years now. I was interested in the Hingham Cemetery and invited because of my relationship with Derby Academy, which is also in Hingham. And we're standing right next to Madame Derby's gravesite. And she was a very important person. People have called her a revolutionary girl in a revolutionary time. And she lived in the 1700s. She was born in 1714. She died in 1790. And one of her legacies is Derby Academy, which was founded as a school for both boys and girls, which was highly unusual. And Derby is one of the oldest coeducational schools in the country, and the oldest coeducational day school in New England. She married twice, childless with both marriages. Midlife, when her first husband died, Ezekiel Hersey, she moved to Salem and married Richard Derby, who was a sea captain. He was a very wealthy man. And they lived lived in a lovely brick home in Salem. And she outlived Richard Derby, came back to Hingham, lived out her days, and was urged to leave money for the establishment of Derby Academy. And it goes on today. School's 220, 230 something years old. Remarkable. And there's a Latin quote here, which means, comes from Horace, exegi monumentum ere perennius, which I'm told, I'm no Latin scholar, I'm told it means I have built a monument more lasting than bronze. And indeed she has. The school still is going on today, even though she is long gone. So the students at Derby sometimes come down on her birthday, April 18th, and come to the site and pay homage to the benefactress, Sarah Derby. As you can see over to my left, there's a small obelisk that's leaning. Eventually that will have to be straightened. And we have two companies with whom we do business for the headstones. One is Monte Granite in Quincy. They do the very heavy pieces, thousands of pounds of stone. And the other one is Kevin Duffy, Line and Stone Company. And he comes in and he cleans, he can repair smaller headstones. And he comes in usually once a year to help us out. This is a big plot of land. It's the only arboretum cemetery on the South Shore, I'm told. And it's 13 plus acres. There are indigenous species here, like sugar maples, for example, but there are also imported trees here. So there are a variety of trees, some exotic, that is not from the area, and many of them that are very old, up to a couple hundred years old. And they eventually, if not treated properly, will perish.
So there's many things that we do here in the cemetery. One of the things that we've done for years here is we've maintained some of these trees through our plant health care program. So we spray for insects and diseases in the cemetery, so hopefully some of these diseases and insects that are native to the areas around here, or even invasive ones, don't take out some of these established trees that we've had here for such a long time. Some of the other things we do are the pruning and removal of trees, as well as the stump grinding of old trees, and hopefully coming up soon we'll be planting some new trees for further generations to enjoy while the cemetery is still here. Cemeteries especially are usually very open places, and seeing that we're very close to the water here, we're prone to getting high winds, and when trees aren't pruned, then Mother Nature will prune them if people don't step in and do so. So an area like this is prone to high winds, and therefore also breaks in trees and other hazardous issues that may arise if people don't intervene and take care of the tree before it's too late. So we need to be very sensitive working in here. Obviously there's a lot of historical things that are invaluable up in the cemetery. So we need to be very careful when we're doing work around here so that we don't disturb any of the grave sites that have been here, as well as we need to be careful for watching the equipment coming through for curbing and things like that. Since it's tight quarters, we need to be extra cautious when we're doing this work that's already very sensitive to being safety friendly.
I used to drive through here and say, geez, you'd have to be crazy to want to work at you need to be a billy goat to do half these hills. And the next thing I know is I was here doing it. So you only have 10 feet to work with between the headstones, so a big machine is kind of in the way. So this thing you can get in around the headstones and the older parts up and back here, and those are definitely more right up this ridge here actually where you're filming, and that drops right off on one side, so you don't have much room to play with. You're kind of digging it across instead of from one end to the other, which makes it challenging. And but I take it as like, today I'm going to do this yard, which is just right this section, and tomorrow it's that yard. If you piece it out, you can get it done.
Fencing here is a good example of late Victorian cemetery surround. It surrounds the lot of this family here. It's made out of cast iron, and it's one of the only ones, if not the only one, left in Hingham. In fact, in most rural cemeteries. It was restored recently, about 7 or 8 years ago, with money from the Community Preservation Fund to great expense. But we felt it was necessary to show this particular kind of surround for the Victorian headstone. This is a headstone of a wonderful benefactor to Hingham, Wilmon Brewer, who died at the age of 100. And Wilmon was a great benefactor. He made it possible to buy World's End, and he donated the Old Ordinary to the town. He was also a poet and an author, which is why we have this wonderful Art Deco look to the top of the headstone. It was rumored that he was on the short list to be the Poet Emeritus of the United States, which is an honor even just to be named. Wilmon Brewer died at the age of 103. I might point out that throughout the cemetery you'll see very white monuments. This is part of our monument restoration program. We got grant money a number of years ago and have slowly been restoring the monuments and cleaning them. The ones that are bright and clean usually are in the sun because the lichen on the marble gets in there and starts to deteriorate them, and then they turn a little moldy, or green. Here's a good example of an Egyptian-style tomb. It has the ibis bird at the top. This was all part of that Egyptian movement where King Tut's tomb had been discovered, and there was an interest in Egyptology. And Mount Auburn Cemetery, the gate at Mount Auburn, is done in an Egyptian style as well. So we have Egypt represented here. All right, this is the most beautiful statue in the cemetery. It was created by William Wetmore Story. William Wetmore Story lived in Salem. His father was a Supreme Court justice, and William was destined to be a lawyer the way his father was. However, when his father died, he was approached by people to make a marble bust of his father. And he had dabbled in sculpture, and he decided he would take it on as his life. So he and his wife took the boat and went to Florence, Italy, where he studied sculpture. And he became a famous American artist whose work is in the Museum of Fine Arts, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and other major museums across the country. Now, while he was over there, his wife died, and he was devastated. He stopped work, and his children came to him and said, "This is what you're giving to the world. You can't stop. Why don't you do a memorial to Mother?" So he decided he would do this beautiful sculpture called the Angel of Grief. The original is in the Protestant cemetery in Rome. One of the problems with this monument is that the arm is unsupported. And over the years, I think the kids were hanging on it, and it broke off. There's a piece here, and some of the fingers were missing. At one point, we contacted some of these other cemeteries with the same statue and thought about exchanging hand parts, but that never came to fruition. So we hired a wonderful artisan from the Museum of Fine Arts by the name of Reno Pisano, who came out, and he not only attached the arm with a titanium pin and the hand with another pin, but he created some new fingers out of the same Carrara marble that was used in the monument. I urge you to look at the beauty of this statue. Her face is beautifully carved. Her robes have beautiful folds in them. Her feet are even swathed in a fine veil of netting. Each monument is a little different. The original has the wings swept back, and ours have the wings forward. This is a very, very emotional statue, and many times when I come through here, I will find objects that have been left here. There are often pennies or money up here. There are rosary beads hanging from her hand. I have found pumpkins and squash and zucchini down below. I have found roses in the middle of the winter tucked under her arm. People are just emotionally very, very taken with this statue. I want to point out the monument to Albert Fearing. Again, think about that monument as saying, he was a very wealthy man, he had no children, and he was a philanthropist. He gave charity to many, many organizations. But among other things, he was very interested in the abolitionist movement, and he bought 20 slaves in Tennessee and freed them and had them go to Liberia, where he wanted the freed black slaves to set up their own community. He bought 20 slaves. All right, this is our cremation area, one of the most beautiful sections of the cemetery. It was built in the year 2000 because there was a need for a place for cremations, which are becoming more and more popular. And we were running out of regular burial space. Although we keep opening up, we didn't have enough for all the people interested in cremation. The cremation remains are dug into the center garden. There are no urns, it's just the ashes, and where they're dug in is random. But the name of the person with the birth and death dates are etched on these pavers. It's a beautiful place for contemplation. If you sit on the bench, you can look right down the alley to this beautiful tree at the back, or you can sit on these benches. It's quiet. It's one of the quietest places in the cemetery. And I've often found people sitting up here. One of them was playing a guitar. A couple of them were reading. It's just a nice contemplative place. All right, we have two Massachusetts governors in our cemetery. Number one is Governor John Andrew. John Andrew was very instrumental during the Civil War, and it was his conception that the black people should serve in the Army alongside everyone else in order to fight for the freedom of the slaves. And he was the inspiration behind the 53rd Black Regiment. He was a much beloved statesman and governor, and when he died, there was a retinue of five miles long behind his casket going to Mount Auburn Cemetery, where he had been buried. However, his wife said another year or two later, he really should be in the Hingham Cemetery along with the rest of our family. Their gravesite is to the left. So he was disinterred and reburied in the family lot over there. However, he was so beloved that a collection was gotten up to build a statue, to create a statue in his honor. Our second governor is John Davis Long. John Davis Long lived in Boston, but he had a summer house on Cottage Street. He loved Hingham, and he would come out all summer and be in Hingham and commute into Boston to handle his governor's duties and go back and forth every night. John Davis Long became Secretary of the Navy under McKinley, and he was considered for McKinley's running mate in his second term. McKinley really wanted him, but there were powers that be that said no, Teddy Roosevelt should be your running mate. And when McKinley was assassinated, Teddy Roosevelt became president. Now, if Governor Long had been made vice president, he would be president. He would have been made president. Underneath the tree, we have over here a very important monument. This monument here is Paul Revere's daughter, Mary Revere Lincoln. Now, there were two Lincoln men who lived in Hingham, and one of them was very interested in the Revolution and the Tea Party, and he went in to see Paul Revere all the time to discuss those issues. His brother went with him, and that's where he met Paul Revere's daughter, Mary. They fell in love and got married and lived in Boston. When the husband died, unfortunately, Mary had no money. Wives were not given money, and she was derelict. So the Lincoln family brought her out to Hingham. They took care of her until she died, and they bought her this nice plot right here where we have a monument that discusses her past. One of the monuments that the children really gravitate to is this seal. And this was a couple that loved to travel, and they loved to sail, which is why we have the starfish and the seal. Unfortunately, they were killed in an airplane accident at an early age. But this seal is a representation of the joy of life. It's such a different situation from the grieving angel, which is right over there. And to have the two statues in proximity to each other, the grieving angel says, "Death was terrible, I will never get over it, it's awful, and how can we ever go on living?" Whereas this wonderful, joyous seal has its head up and is saying, "Isn't life great? Didn't we have a good time?" And that is the new philosophy of many people today for their burial site. All right, this is the town Civil War monument. As you know, every town, small and large, across the East lost thousands of men in the Civil War, and every town put up some kind of a monument. You can look at this monument and get an idea of where Hingham stood in the category of wealth. This is Quincy granite, and it's over 30 feet high. It has the names of everybody who died in the Civil War listed around the base. We are standing now in the veterans area, and in the year about 1998, we petitioned the town to open up a veterans area right here underneath the Civil War monument. They agreed because there was no veterans area in town, and we created the veterans area here. The landscape up to then, had said nothing should be put around this monument. We, in keeping with that idea, we decided they would be all flat government issue markers, and they're available to veterans and their spouses or dependent children. It's a lovely area, particularly during Veterans Day and Memorial Day. I want to point out this wonderful Civil War monument. Peter Orish was the youngest volunteer to the Civil War from Hingham. He was 16. His brothers and friends were all getting war fever. We've got to go, we've got to go, we've got to fight. Peter wanted to go too, but he was only 16. However, he was a big guy, and he was strong, and he went to the recruiting office, and they said, "Fine, you're in." So Peter Orish served his regiment and fought in 13 major battles, which are all listed on the back of this monument. Gettysburg, Rappahannock, all the ones that no one survived. Peter survived 13 battles, only to be shot in the arm and ended up in a hospital in Washington where he died. Remember, there was no penicillin. They didn't know anything about sanitation. They were using bloody rags from one dead body onto the next living person. It was a terrible thing. But Peter Orrish was only 19 years old. 13 battles in 3 years. To the end of the tour, I tell a joke. There were 2 elderly people, and every day the husband said to his wife, "What would you like for your birthday, dear?" And this year he asked, and she said, "You know, we have just about everything. Why don't we buy a cemetery lot? We really haven't taken care of that." He said, "Oh, that's fine. We'll do that." So they went and bought a lot. And the next year, she waited for him to ask what she wanted for her birthday. And he didn't say, he didn't ask, he didn't ask. Finally, she said, "Why haven't you asked me what I want for my birthday?" He said, "Well, you didn't use the gift I gave you last year."
Anybody can come here from the morning after the sun rises till dusk, 7 days a week. It's open. We want people to use the cemetery. We want people to be respectful of it. If somebody is contemplating by the burial site of a loved one, of course, you know, that's a private moment for them. But it is a park, and it's open 7 days a week.
This is just a fascinating piece of history here. It goes back to the 1600s. There's very few cemeteries around that have that kind of legacy.
It's amazing that we're all at this one place at different points in our life, and it's important not only to preserve it for those who are buried here and who have passed on, but also for future generations to enjoy.
In over 20 years, I've been walking up here every morning early with the dog at the time, and I have met some of the most wonderful people up here that also walk, and they've become like stewards. And if they see a plant that's fallen over, they pick it up. If there are flags on the ground, they take care of that. And the people that I've met up here all agree that this is just a very lovely place to take a walk, to walk through. You've got an arboretum, so they're beautiful trees. Lots of rolling hills, so you do get a pretty good walk in. And we're very happy and thrilled that people can enjoy this cemetery.
It doesn't take long to fall in love with this place and really have an appreciation for the landscape and the history, the beautiful tree specimens. And I got to know a couple members on the board, and it wasn't long before I joined. We have a wonderful cemetery website, hinghamcemetery.org. And you can find out a lot of the history of the cemetery there. You can email us and ask us for a tour for a lot sale, and find out information about renting the Ames Chapel, find out when tours are. There's a list of burials. We do a lot of genealogy here, helping families find relatives, and that's a lot of fun.
Thank you so much for watching Getting to Know. We hope you've enjoyed everything you've learned about Hingham Cemetery, and that you'll come visit us, and by all means ask questions and contact us.